My name is Eleanor Anderson, and at 67 years old, I never expected to start over. For more than 4 decades, I poured my heart into our family farm, raising crops, animals, and my son Robert after my husband James passed. Last Mother's Day changed everything when Robert looked me in the eyes and said, "You're too old to matter anymore, Mom." His words shattered me, but instead of crumbling, I made a decision. That $212,000 farm he already treated as his inheritance? I sold it. Then I walked away without a word, a fight, or a goodbye. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when someone took you for granted, hit that like button and subscribe to hear how I reclaimed my dignity after decades of putting everyone else first. I was born in 1955, when our country was still recovering from the war and families like mine were building their futures on American soil. My parents, Thomas and Margaret Wilson, purchased our farm in 1948 with money my father saved during his military service. They were determined to create something lasting, something that would feed our family and maybe generations to come. Growing up, I watched my parents rise before dawn to milk cows and tend to chickens. By age 8, I had my own responsibilities: collecting eggs, feeding the smaller animals, and helping my mother preserve vegetables from our garden for winter. It was honest work that taught me the value of persistence, but I dreamed of something different for myself. In high school, I excelled in English and history. My teachers encouraged me to consider college, perhaps to become a teacher myself. I filled out applications and even received a partial scholarship to State University. But my father fell ill my senior year, and those college dreams faded as I stayed to help my mother keep the farm running. It was at the Johnson County Fair in 1972 that my life took another turn. I was helping at our family's produce stand when a tall young man with kind eyes bought every last tomato we had. James Anderson claimed he needed them for his restaurant, but he returned the next day to ask me to the fair dance. He was 4 years older, had served in Vietnam, and had the gentlest hands despite his imposing frame. We married in 1974 in the white clapboard church down the road from the farm. James moved in with me and my parents, learning farming alongside my father, who had recovered enough to teach, but not to handle the physical labor. When my parents passed within months of each other in 1976, they left the farm to us with a simple request: care for the land as they had. Robert came into our world on a stormy night in June 1978. From the moment I held him, I knew I would do anything for this child. James would take him on tractor rides before he could even walk properly, and Robert's first words included cow and dirt. Those early years were our happiest, the three of us working together as our farm flourished under James's innovative approaches. Then came the winter of 1995. Robert was 17, already applying to colleges with dreams of business school. James had been working too hard, ignoring chest pains for weeks. I found him collapsed in the barn one February morning. The heart attack was massive, and by the time the ambulance navigated our snow-covered rural roads, my husband of 21 years was gone. Robert and I were shattered. He retreated into silent grief while I faced the practical reality: a farm to run, a mortgage to pay, and a son who needed college tuition. The insurance money helped, but it wasn't enough for everything. I made a choice then that would set the stage for what happened later. I took out a second mortgage on the farm to ensure Robert could attend the university of his choice. "Mom, I'll come back and help after graduation," Robert had promised as we packed his car for college. "The farm will be my responsibility someday." Those words had comforted me during the lonely years that followed. I hired help when I could afford it, worked myself to exhaustion when I couldn't, and wrote checks for Robert's education that kept me awake at night worrying about foreclosure. When Robert graduated with his business degree in 2000, I sat proudly in the audience. He returned home that summer, but his interests had shifted. The farm was now outdated and inefficient, according to his new business vocabulary. He stayed 6 months before taking a corporate job in the city, 3 hours away. I continued alone, adapting as best I could, proud when Robert landed promotions but noticing a growing distance between us. When he met Catherine in 2003, I was hopeful. She came from a farming family and seemed to appreciate our homestead during their visits. Their wedding in 2005 was beautiful, held in our apple orchard with twinkling lights in the trees. My grandchildren Emma and Michael, born in 2007 and 2010, brought new joy to my life. I converted James's office into a playroom and cherished their weekend visits. But as the children grew, those visits became less frequent. Robert always had excuses. Soccer practice, dance recitals, work commitments. More concerning were Robert's casual comments about when he inherited the place. He spoke about potential developments, selling parcels to fund his retirement, building a vacation home on the pond. I would gently remind him that I had no plans to leave the farm anytime soon, and he would laugh it off. "Just planning ahead, Mom," he'd say. "Someone has to think about the future." I chose to ignore the warning signs. After all, this was my son who had once followed his father around with a toy tractor, who had cried in my arms when we scattered James's ashes over the west field. I couldn't believe he saw me only as a caretaker for his future asset. But the seeds of entitlement had been planted, and they would bear bitter fruit on a Mother's Day I will never forget. By May 2022, my life had settled into a comfortable routine. At 67, I had scaled back much of the farming operation, leasing most of the tillable acreage to neighboring farmers while maintaining my large vegetable garden and small flock of chickens. The farmhouse, while showing its age in places, remained my sanctuary. Each creaking floorboard and weathered doorframe held memories of the life James and I had built. Mother's Day had become a complicated holiday for me. In the years immediately following James's death, Robert had been thoughtful, bringing handmade cards and helping with farm chores. Once he moved away, his efforts diminished. Last year's Mother's Day had consisted of a rushed phone call while he was driving between meetings. The year before, Catherine had sent flowers with a card clearly signed in her handwriting alone. Still, I refused to surrender hope. Perhaps this year would be different. Robert had mentioned bringing the family when we spoke in April, and I had immediately begun planning. The week before Mother's Day, I threw myself into preparations. First came the deep cleaning I could no longer do in a single day, washing windows to let in the spring sunshine, polishing the oak dining table that had belonged to my mother, and airing out the guest rooms where my grandchildren would stay. My knees protested as I scrubbed the kitchen floor, but satisfaction outweighed the discomfort. On Thursday, I drove into town for groceries, my shopping list ambitious. Robert had always loved my chicken and dumplings. Emma adored my apple pie, and little Michael would eat nothing but my cornbread with honey butter. The checkout clerk raised her eyebrows at my overflowing cart. "Big plans this weekend, Eleanor?" "My son and his family are coming for Mother's Day," I replied, unable to keep the pride from my voice. "That's wonderful. Must be a good 4 months since I've seen them in town." 6, actually, I corrected, then changed the subject. On my way home, I stopped at Marge Wilson's house. Marge had been my friend since high school, and had helped me through the darkest days after losing James. Her front porch had witnessed more of my tears and laughter than any therapist's office ever could. "You're going all out again this year," she observed as we shared iced tea. It wasn't a question. "They're staying the whole weekend," I said. "Robert needs to discuss some repairs to the barn roof after that last storm." Marge's expression tightened slightly. "He's coming to talk about repairs? On Mother's Day?" "Among other things," I said defensively. "The grandkids are excited to see the new chicks." "Eleanor," Marge began carefully, "does Robert ever visit when he doesn't have some agenda about the farm?" Her question stung because I knew the answer. Robert's calls and visits always included discussions about property taxes, maintenance issues, or potential improvements that inevitably involved selling something. "He's busy," I said. "His job keeps him traveling." "Too busy for his mother except when the farm needs attention?" Marge's directness was why I valued her friendship, even when her words were uncomfortable. "It's complicated," I replied. "Anyway, this visit will be different. I can feel it." Marge squeezed my hand. "I hope you're right, honey." Friday was dedicated to cooking and baking. I prepared what I could in advance. Pie crusts chilling in the refrigerator, cookie dough ready to bake, chicken marinating. My back ached from standing all day, but I pushed through, wanting everything to be perfect. As I worked, memories of past Mother's Days flooded back. James had always made the day special, often with simple gestures. Wildflowers in a mason jar, breakfast in bed, taking over all the farm chores. One year, he and 7-year-old Robert had painted a birdhouse together, now weathered but still hanging from the old oak tree. I paused while rolling out dough, remembering James's words after we'd received the deed to the farm from my parents. "This land isn't just ours, Ellie," he'd said. "We're its caretakers for a while. Then we'll pass that responsibility to Robert when the time is right." When the time is right. Not when I died or became incapable. James had understood the difference between inheritance and entitlement. Saturday morning I was up at dawn. I baked cookies, set the formal dining table with my grandmother's china, and arranged fresh flowers from my garden as centerpieces. In the guest rooms I placed framed photos of the children's previous visits. Emma feeding a lamb bottle, Michael riding on James's old tractor with me. By afternoon everything was ready. I even had time to visit the hairdresser in town for a trim and style, something I rarely indulged in. Looking in the mirror, I saw glimpses of the younger woman James had loved, beneath the silver hair and laugh lines. My phone chimed as I was changing into my nice blue dress, the one I saved for special occasions. It was a text from Robert. "Running late. Traffic bad. Be there around 6. My heart sank slightly. I had planned dinner for 3 p.m., but I texted back cheerfully. "No problem. Drive safely. Food will wait." I adjusted the oven temperature to keep things warm and sat on the porch swing, watching the long driveway that led from the main road to our farmhouse. The sun began its slow descent, casting golden light across fields that had sustained 3 generations of my family. Despite Robert's delay, I felt a flutter of anticipation. Tomorrow was Mother's Day and my son was coming home. Whatever strain had developed between us would surely ease once we were together. After all, we were family. Some bonds couldn't be broken. How wrong I was. That night was the longest of my life, even worse than the night Robert died. At least then I had Amanda by my side holding my hand, assuring me we would get through it together. Now I truly had no one. I paced my bedroom until the early hours of the morning, cycling through waves of disbelief, heartbreak, and rage. Each emotion crashed over me more powerfully than the last, leaving me gasping for breath. Memories bombarded me relentlessly. Amanda taking her first steps across this very room, her little face lighting up with pride. Amanda on her first day of school, clutching my hand tightly until the last possible moment. Amanda as a teenager, slamming her door during an argument, then sheepishly apologizing hours later. Amanda in her college graduation cap and gown, telling me she couldn't have done it without my support. Had it all been a lie? Had she been calculating the value of my estate even then, waiting for the right moment to strike? I thought about William, my first husband, who abandoned us when Amanda was only 3 years old. He had simply walked out one day, leaving nothing but a note and empty bank accounts. I had worked 2 jobs to support us, put myself through night school to get my teaching degree, made sure Amanda never felt the absence of material things even when I went without. For years, I had sewn her Halloween costumes by hand because we couldn't afford store-bought ones. I had skipped meals when money was tight to ensure she always ate well. I had foregone vacations and new clothes and small luxuries to save for her college fund. And this was how she repaid me. Around 3 in the morning, I finally called Judith. Despite the hour, she answered on the second ring. "Ellie? What's wrong?" Her voice was alert, concerned. "Judith," I choked out, barely able to form words through my tears. "Amanda, she and Michael, they're trying to take everything." I poured out the whole story, every devastating detail. Judith listened without interrupting, though I could hear her sharp intake of breath when I recounted Michael's phone call. "That conniving little witch," Judith finally said when I finished. "And I never trusted that snake she's engaged to. I'm coming over first thing in the morning, Ellie. Don't do anything until I get there." "What can I do?" I asked, feeling helpless. "She's my daughter, Judith. My baby girl." "No," Judith said firmly. "She stopped being your baby girl the moment she decided to rob you blind and throw you away like garbage. This is elder abuse, Ellie, plain and simple. And it's illegal." After hanging up with Judith, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the family photos on my dresser. Amanda through the years, from toothless baby to beautiful woman. And Robert, my rock, my partner in everything. What would he advise me to do now? Robert had always been the pragmatic one in our relationship. "When you're in a storm, you need to find your North Star," he would say. "Focus on what matters most and let that guide you." What mattered most now was protecting myself. Amanda and Michael had shown their true colors. They wouldn't stop until they had everything. Sleep evaded me completely. Instead, I opened my laptop and began researching elder financial abuse and undue influence. The information I found was both disturbing and empowering. I was far from alone in experiencing this type of betrayal. Adult children taking advantage of aging parents was distressingly common. But there were protections available, legal recourses I could pursue. I took notes frantically, creating a plan of action. By dawn, my grief had hardened into resolve. I would not be a victim. Not again. Judith arrived at 8 o'clock with bagels, coffee, and a fierce determination to help me fight back. At 70, she was still a force of nature, with short silver hair and penetrating green eyes that missed nothing. "First things first," she said, spreading cream cheese on a bagel and pushing it toward me. "You need to call Nathan. Today." Nathan Baldwin had been Robert's friend since college and our family attorney for decades. He had handled Robert's will and helped me navigate the complex legal matters after his death. I trusted him completely. I called his office as soon as it opened at 9, explaining that I had an emergency situation. Nathan's secretary squeezed me in for an 11 o'clock appointment. "Do you want me to come with you?" Judith asked. I shook my head. "I need to do this myself. But thank you for being here." Nathan's office was in a converted Victorian similar to my own home, with dark wood paneling and leather chairs that had been there since he started practicing law 40 years ago. He looked up from his desk when his secretary showed me in, his bushy eyebrows drawing together in concern. "Eleanor, what's going on?" Mary said it was urgent. I sat down heavily in the chair across from him, suddenly overwhelmed by the enormity of what I was about to do. "Nathan, I need your help. Amanda and her fiancé are trying to have me declared incompetent so they can take control of my assets." His expression darkened as I detailed everything I had overheard. By the time I finished, he was furiously making notes, his pen scratching across his yellow legal pad. "This is serious, Eleanor," he said finally. "What they're planning constitutes elder abuse and fraud. We need to take immediate steps to protect you and your assets." He outlined a multi-pronged approach. First, secure my finances by adding extra verification steps for any large withdrawals or property transactions. Second, obtain a comprehensive cognitive assessment from a respected geriatric specialist to document my mental competence. Third, revoke any existing powers I might have granted Amanda in the past, and create new advance directives naming someone else as my healthcare proxy. "Who do you trust completely?" Nathan asked. "Besides Amanda, that is." I thought for a moment. "Judith Hansen. And my sister Patricia in Seattle." "Good. We'll name them in your new documents." He hesitated, then asked gently, "Eleanor, do you want to pursue legal action against Amanda and Michael?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I don't know," I admitted. "She's still my daughter." Nathan nodded sympathetically. "You don't have to decide right now, but we should gather evidence in case you choose to later. Can you record any conversations where they pressure you about these documents or discuss their plans?" Recording my own daughter felt wrong, a violation of trust. Then again, she had already shattered any trust between us. "Oregon is a one-party consent state," Nathan explained. "You can legally record conversations you're part of without informing the other participants." I nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." By the time I left Nathan's office, I had a comprehensive plan to protect myself legally and financially. But the emotional wounds were still raw, bleeding freely beneath my composed exterior. That evening, I set up hidden recording devices in my living room and kitchen, areas where Amanda and I usually sat during her visits. I felt like a spy in my own home, but Nathan had emphasized the importance of evidence. If Amanda and Michael escalated their attempts to take control of my affairs, I needed proof of their intentions. I also called my sister Patricia, who was horrified by what I told her. "I'm coming down there," she insisted. "You shouldn't be alone right now." "No, Pat," I said firmly. "I need to handle this myself. Just knowing you're there if I need you is enough." That night, as I lay in bed looking at the empty space where Robert used to sleep, I made a decision. I would not confront Amanda and Michael directly, not yet. Instead, I would play the role they expected of me, the sweet, confused old lady, while gathering evidence and strengthening my legal protections. I would let them think their plan was working until I was ready to show my hand. It was time for this mother to teach her daughter one final painful lesson. When their car disappeared down the long driveway, I walked back into the silent farmhouse. The rooms felt different now, as if Robert's words had physically altered the space we'd shared for decades. I moved mechanically, clearing away the breakfast dishes they'd left behind, straightening the hastily made guest beds, and collecting the towels dropped on bathroom floors. Around mid-afternoon, I finally allowed myself to sit at the kitchen table where just hours before, my son had deemed me too old to matter. The tears came then, hot and relentless. I cried for the little boy who once followed his father around the farm with adoring eyes. I cried for the young man who had promised to return after college. Most of all, I cried for myself for believing that blood would guarantee respect. Darkness fell and still I sat, memories flickering through my mind like an old film reel. Robert's first steps across this very kitchen floor. James teaching him to drive the tractor in the south field. The three of us picking apples from the orchard and making cider in the fall. When had my son stopped seeing the farm as our family's heart and started viewing it as his future windfall? I slept fitfully that night, if it could be called sleep at all. By dawn, I was sitting on the porch swing with a cup of coffee, watching the sun rise over land that had sustained my family for generations. The familiar view brought no comfort, only questions about what would happen when I truly became too frail to manage alone. Would Robert put me in a nursing home to speed up his inheritance? Would he visit? Or would I become an inconvenient obligation checking another box on his efficient life plan? The thought made my coffee taste bitter. As the morning warmed, I walked the property, touching the weathered wood of the barn that Robert had dismissed as worthless. Inside, the scent of hay and aged timber wrapped around me like an old friend. James had rebuilt this structure board by board after a fire in 1983. I ran my fingers over his initials, carved discreetly in a support beam. "What would you do, James?" I whispered to the empty space. No answer came, of course, but I found myself walking purposefully to the farmhouse. In James's old office, now the grandchildren's playroom, I pulled out the ladder step stool and reached for the highest shelf of the closet. The metal box was dusty but intact, its key still hidden in the fake plant pot nearby. Inside were our important documents: the deed to the farm, our marriage certificate, James's will, insurance policies. I spread them across his desk, reading carefully this time instead of filing them away in grief as I had after his death. The language was clear. The farm had passed to me entirely after James's death. There was no provision for it to automatically transfer to Robert, no stipulation that I was merely a caretaker until he came of age. The property was mine to manage, to live on, and yes, to sell if I chose. Beneath the documents, I found James's journal, the leather-bound book he'd written in most evenings. I had never read it after his passing, too raw with grief to face his private thoughts. Now I opened it with trembling hands. May 15, 1992. Robert turns 14 tomorrow. He told me today he wants to study business instead of agriculture at college. Ellie's worried he's rejecting the farm life, but I told her every generation has to find their own path. If the farm isn't his passion, we shouldn't force it on him. The land has been good to us, but it's a means to a life, not life itself. If selling it someday gives him a better start than we had, so be it. But Ellie loves this place with her whole heart. I hope Robert understands someday that his mother's happiness matters more than any inheritance. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading entries that revealed James had been preparing for the possibility that Robert might not want the farming life. He had never seen the property as Robert's birthright, but as our home for as long as we wanted it. The final entry, written just days before his heart attack, hit me like a physical blow. February 2, 1995. Spoke with Peterson at the bank today about the mortgage. With the new loan terms, we'll have it paid off by the time I'm 65. Told Ellie we should celebrate by taking that trip to the Grand Canyon she's always wanted. Robert heads to college next year. He's got his heart set on that business school in the city. It'll be tight financially, but we'll make it work. If anything happens to me, Ellie should sell the back 40 acres. That would clear the mortgage and give her breathing room. I've updated my will to make everything as simple as possible for her. This farm is hers, not Robert's, not anyone else's. I've told Robert as much. A son should make his own way in the world, not wait for his parents to die so he can cash in. I love that boy, but he's got a streak of entitlement I don't like. Ellie doesn't see it. She's always been softer with him. But a man who expects the world to hand him anything will never be truly happy. I closed the journal, my hand steady now despite the emotional earthquake within. James had seen it even then, the seed of entitlement that had grown into the man who could look his mother in the eye and tell her she was too old to matter. The phone rang, startling me. It was Marge. Well? How was the big Mother's Day celebration? I couldn't even pretend. He told me I'm too old to matter anymore, Marge. Her sharp intake of breath was followed by a string of colorful language that would have scandalized the church ladies. He said what? Through tears and anger, I relayed the entire conversation. Marge listened without interrupting, a rare occurrence for my outspoken friend. And now? She finally asked when I finished. Now what? What are you going to do about it, Eleanor? The question caught me off guard. In all my hurt and anger, I hadn't thought beyond the pain to action. What can I do? He's my son. And you're his mother, not his property manager. That farm is yours, Eleanor. James left it to you, not to Robert. Yes, but eventually. Eventually nothing, Marge cut in. Your eventually might be 20 years from now. Are you going to spend those years being treated like a caretaker of Robert's future payday? Like you don't matter. Her words echoed Robert's but carried the opposite message. I did matter. My life, my home, my choices, they all mattered. I don't know what to do, I admitted. Yes, you do, Marge said gently. You're just afraid to do it. After we hung up, I returned to the porch swing, James's journal in my lap. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the fields as I considered options I'd never allowed myself to contemplate. For dinner, I walked to the oak tree where James had proposed, carrying a simple sandwich and his journal. Sitting on the old wooden bench he'd built beneath its branches, I read more entries, learning that my husband had been both more pragmatic and more romantic than I'd realized. He had planned for every contingency to ensure my security, but never lost sight of what truly mattered. That we lived our lives with purpose and dignity. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter not to send, but to clarify my thoughts. Addressed to Robert, it poured out all the hurt, disappointment, and anger I felt. I wrote about the sacrifices I'd made for his education, the second mortgage that had nearly cost me the farm. I detailed the loneliness of continuing alone after James died, always believing Robert would eventually appreciate the legacy we'd built. I wrote until my hand cramped and tears spotted the pages. Then I sealed the letter in an envelope, wrote Robert's name on it, and placed it in my dresser drawer. I would never send it, but the act of writing had crystallized something important. For the first time since James's death, I slept deeply and dreamlessly. When I woke, I knew exactly what I needed to do. Too old to matter? We would see about that. The next morning, I called Harold Fisher's law office. Harold had been James's friend since high school and had handled our legal matters for decades. His secretary sounded surprised to hear from me, but scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. Harold's office hadn't changed much over the years. The same wood paneling, leather chairs, and framed fishing photos on the wall. He stood to greet me, his once dark hair now completely silver. Eleanor, good to see you. It's been 3 years? Not since you updated your will after Michael was born. That sounds right, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk. I need some advice, Harold. Of course. What can I help with? I want to confirm something first. The farm is legally mine, correct? After James died. Harold's bushy eyebrows rose. Absolutely. James left everything to you. The farm, the equipment, the savings, though that wasn't much at the time. Is someone suggesting otherwise? I explained Robert's assumptions about his inheritance and his recent behavior. Harold's expression darkened as I recounted the Mother's Day conversation. Too old to matter, he repeated, shaking his head. Forgive me for speaking plainly, Eleanor. But that's absolute hogwash. You're in better shape at 67 than I am at 71, and I'm not planning to be irrelevant anytime soon. His indignation was oddly comforting. So legally, I continued, I could sell the farm if I wanted to? Harold leaned back in his chair. It's your property, Eleanor. You can sell it, gift it, divide it up, whatever you choose. Robert has no legal claim until after you're gone, and even then, only if your will designates him as beneficiary. What if I wanted to sell it? Without telling Robert first? Harold studied me carefully. That would be entirely your right. Though I imagine it would create quite a family situation. The family situation is already beyond repair, I said quietly. He nodded, not pressing for details. If you're serious about exploring a sale, you should start by getting an accurate property assessment. The real estate market has changed significantly in recent years. I left Harold's office with referrals to a real estate agent and a financial advisor, plus the reassurance that I was legally entitled to make decisions about my own property. The knowledge was both liberating and terrifying. Deborah Mills from Countryside Realty agreed to meet me the following day. She was younger than I expected, perhaps in her 40s, with a practical approach that I appreciated. Before we discuss anything else, she said as we sat at my kitchen table, I want to know your goals. Are you definitely selling, just exploring options, or something else entirely? I'm strongly considering selling, I said, but I need to understand what that would mean financially and practically. Deborah nodded. Fair enough. Let's start with a property assessment to establish value, then discuss your options. The assessment process took several days. Deborah walked every acre with me, examined the house, barns, and outbuildings, and took countless photographs. She made notes about the condition of everything from the roof to the water well. When she returned with her findings, I braced myself for disappointment. The farm needed work, I knew that. Based on current market conditions, comparable properties, and the recent development interest in this area, I would value your property at approximately $212,000, she announced. I nearly dropped my coffee cup. That's significantly more than I expected. Deborah smiled. The Miller Creek development has changed land values dramatically in this area. Your location just 3 miles from their planned community makes this property particularly valuable. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very development Robert had mentioned as reason to sell was indeed increasing the farm's value, but it was my value to claim, not his. If I decided to sell, what would the timeline look like? I asked. In this market, we could list immediately and potentially have offers within weeks. The closing process typically takes 30 to 45 days after an accepted offer. My mind raced. I could sell the farm and be gone before Robert's next scheduled visit in August. I need time to think, I told her. Of course. This is a major decision. After Deborah left, I drove to First National Bank, where I'd banked my entire adult life. Martin Chun, the loan officer who had helped me refinance the mortgage years ago, welcomed me warmly. The farm mortgage is indeed paid in full, he confirmed, checking my records. That was completed about 5 years ago, correct? Yes, I said, remembering the small celebration I'd had alone on that momentous day. I had called Robert to share the news, but he'd been too busy to talk. So what brings you in today, Mrs. Anderson? I'm considering selling the farm. I wanted to understand my financial position first. Martin provided a complete overview of my accounts. The modest savings I'd accumulated, my small retirement fund, and the projected Social Security benefits I could expect. The numbers were sobering. Without the farm as a source of income and a place to live, I would need to carefully manage any proceeds from its sale. My next stop was William Parker's office. William was a financial advisor Harold had recommended, specializing in retirement planning. He reviewed the information I'd gathered and asked pointed questions about my lifestyle, health, and future needs. Based on average life expectancy for someone in your good health, he explained, you should plan for at least 20 to 25 more years. If you sell the farm for the estimated $212,000, properly invested, that could provide a modest supplement to your Social Security income while preserving the principal. Enough to rent a small place in town? Yes, especially if you choose one of the senior living communities, which tend to be more affordable than general housing. I'd recommend looking at Millfield Gardens. They offer independent apartments for seniors with reasonable monthly fees. Armed with this information, I drove to Millfield Gardens that same afternoon. The complex was pleasant. 1- and 2-bedroom apartments in a series of connected buildings surrounding garden courtyards. The community center hosted activities, and a small bus provided transportation to grocery stores and medical appointments. Barbara Evans, the property manager, showed me a 1-bedroom unit on the second floor with a small balcony overlooking a well-tended flower garden. "We have a waiting list usually," she explained, "but as luck would have it, this unit just became available yesterday. The previous tenant moved to be closer to her daughter in Florida." The apartment was nothing like my spacious farmhouse, but it was clean, bright, and required no maintenance on my part. The monthly fee was within what William had calculated I could afford. "How long is your waiting list typically?" I asked. 3 to 6 months. "If you're interested in this unit, I wouldn't wait to decide." I told her I needed a few days to think it over, but inside pieces were falling into place. That evening I invited Marge and my 2 other closest friends, Diane and Patricia, for coffee. The 4 of us had been meeting monthly for decades, supporting each other through marriages, childbirths, divorces, and widowhood. "I'm thinking of selling the farm," I announced after serving coffee and pie. 3 pairs of eyes widened in shock. "The farm? Your farm?" Diane clarified, as if I might be referring to some other property. "Yes, my farm." I emphasized the "my" slightly. I explained what had happened on Mother's Day and my subsequent research. My friends listened intently, occasionally exchanging glances. "So you'd move to Millfield Gardens?" Patricia asked when I finished. "I'm considering it." "What about Robert? Have you discussed this with him?" Diane, always the diplomat, asked carefully. "No. And I don't plan to until after it's done." Marge, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "Good for you, Eleanor. It's about time. You think I should do it?" I asked, somewhat surprised by her immediate support. "I think you should do whatever gives you peace and dignity for the next chapter of your life," Marge said firmly. "If selling the farm and moving to town does that, then yes, absolutely." "He'll be furious," Diane warned. "Probably," I acknowledged. "But I've spent 27 years putting his needs first. Maybe it's time I considered my own." Patricia reached over and squeezed my hand. "We'll help however we can. If you decide to sell, we'll help you pack, move, whatever you need." Their support brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I had defined myself as James's widow and Robert's mother. The prospect of being simply Eleanor again was both frightening and exhilarating. The next morning, I visited the farm one more time with Deborah Mills. We walked each field, the orchard, the creek where Robert had caught his first fish. I shared memories of each spot, not to dissuade myself from selling, but to honor what this place had meant to me. "There's one more thing," I told Deborah as we concluded our tour. "If possible, I'd prefer to sell to someone who will farm at least part of the land. I know that might limit potential buyers or affect the price." "Actually," Deborah interrupted, "I may have the perfect buyers already. The Thompsons are a young couple looking for exactly this type of property. They run a sustainable farming operation and need to expand. They have solid financing pre-approved and have been searching for months. Would they care for it, do you think?" Deborah's expression softened. "From what I know of them, yes. They're committed to preserving farmland, not developing it." 2 days later, I signed the listing agreement with Deborah. The Thompsons toured the property the following weekend while Robert was at a business conference in Chicago. Their enthusiasm for the farm, its soil, the old apple orchard, even the barn that Robert had dismissed as worthless reminded me of James and myself when we were young. "We've been dreaming of a place like this," Sarah Thompson told me, her eyes bright with plans and possibilities. "The established orchard alone would give us a head start on our organic fruit operation." Her husband David nodded eagerly. "And that barn has the perfect setup for our small-scale dairy processing." When they offered the full asking price of $212,000 just 2 days later, it felt like a sign. The property would pass to people who valued it for what it was, not for what it could be converted into. Robert called that weekend, oblivious to the transaction in progress. "I've been researching that developer I mentioned," he said without preamble. "They might be willing to option the property now, with you retaining life rights to stay in the house." "How considerate," I replied, my tone neutral. "It's a smart arrangement, Mom. You get financial security, I get assurance about the property's future, and you don't have to move. I appreciate your concern, but I'm managing just fine. We'll discuss it more when I visit in August. I'm thinking we should meet with my attorney to start paperwork for transferring the deed into a family trust one would manage." "We'll see," I said noncommittally. After hanging up, I felt a strange calm. Robert had shown his hand completely now. In his mind, the farm was already his to control. He had no idea that in less than 30 days, it would belong to the Thompsons. I signed the final sale agreement with my heart pounding but my signature steady. Harold reviewed all the documents, assuring me everything was in order. William Parker helped me establish accounts for the proceeds, structured to provide monthly income. And Barbara Evans at Millfield Gardens happily accepted my deposit on the one-bedroom apartment with the garden view. As the closing date approached, I began quietly sorting through decades of possessions. Some items were easy to categorize. Family photographs and heirlooms would come with me. Worn-out furniture would be donated. Farm equipment would be included in the sale. But what about James's old records? Robert's childhood art projects? The handmade quilt my mother had created for our wedding? Each object carried memories, some joyful, some painful, all part of the tapestry of my life on this farm. I worked methodically room by room, creating piles to keep, donate, sell, or leave behind. For the grandchildren, I set aside special treasures. James's pocket watch for Michael, my mother's pearl necklace for Emma, family recipes carefully copied into new books. One Sunday, I held an estate sale for items I wouldn't need in my new, smaller life. Neighbors and strangers picked through the physical remnants of my decades on the farm, haggling over prices of tools and kitchen gadgets. I watched with detachment, already mentally separating myself from these possessions. The closing date was set for July 15th, exactly 1 month before Robert's planned August visit. I chose the timing deliberately, wanting everything complete before he could interfere. The Thompsons agreed to let me stay in the farmhouse until July 31st, giving me time for the final move. As I signed paper after paper at Harold's office on closing day, I felt a curious mixture of grief and liberation. The farm had been my anchor for so long, both my haven and my prison. Now I was cutting that line, setting myself adrift into an uncertain future. "Congratulations," Harold said as I signed the final document. "You are officially no longer a farm owner." The check for $212,000 minus fees and commission seemed almost unreal in my hands. This slip of paper represented my home, my history, my husband's legacy. But it also represented my freedom, the freedom to matter, to choose my own path for whatever years remained to me. That evening, I walked every inch of the property that was no longer mine. The setting sun bathed the fields in golden light, the same light that had greeted me on countless mornings and bid me good night on countless evenings. I said goodbye to each beloved spot, promising to carry its memory with me. Under the oak tree where James had proposed, I made a silent vow. I would never again allow anyone, not even my son, to make me feel that I was too old to matter. The 2 weeks following the closing passed in a blur of activity. Patricia, Diane, and Marge arrived daily to help me pack, their presence turning the bittersweet task into something approaching enjoyable. We reminisced over forgotten treasures found in closets and drawers, laughed at outdated clothing I'd kept for no good reason, and sometimes cried together when a particular item triggered powerful memories. "What about this?" Diane asked one afternoon, holding up a faded blue ribbon. "Robert's first prize at the county fair," I explained. "He was 10. His woodworking project beat out kids much older than him." "Keep pile?" she asked gently. I considered it for a moment, then shook my head. "No. Leave behind pile." We had established a special category for items I wanted Robert to have but couldn't bear to give him directly. These would remain in the farmhouse for him to find after I was gone, a silent message about what I had valued and what I had chosen to leave behind. The Thompsons visited several times during this period, eager to learn about the property from someone who knew its every quirk and blessing. I showed Sarah the best spots for wild blackberries, warned David about the section of the west field that always flooded in spring, and demonstrated how to coax the old well pump when it grew stubborn. "We can't thank you enough for choosing us," Sarah said during one such visit. "I know you must have had higher offers from developers." "The farm deserves to remain a farm," I replied simply. "You'll be good stewards." They invited me to visit anytime, and I promised I would, though we all understood that clean breaks heal fastest. As my departure date approached, I began saying goodbye to neighbors who had been part of my life for decades. Some expressed shock at my decision, others quiet understanding. A few confided they'd been considering similar moves as age made farm work increasingly difficult. Meanwhile, Robert continued his weekly calls, oblivious to the transformation underway. He spoke of "when I take over the farm," and my plans for the property, with such certainty that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "I've been thinking about your suggestion," I said during one call, careful to keep my voice neutral. "Which one?" he asked. "About my living situation. You might be right that I should consider some changes." "Finally. That's great news, Mom. I can start the paperwork for the family trust right away." "Let's discuss it when you visit in August," I replied, the half-truth sitting uncomfortably on my tongue. "Perfect. I'll bring the preliminary documents. This is the right decision, Mom. You'll see." The final week arrived. My new apartment at Millfield Gardens was ready, partially furnished with the pieces I'd kept. My bedroom set, James's reading chair, the small dining table where countless family meals had been shared. Marge had helped me arrange everything, adding cheerful touches like new curtains and fresh flowers. "It looks like you," she declared when we finished. "Comfortable, practical, but with hidden beauty in the details." I had one last task before leaving the farm, writing a letter to Robert. Unlike the emotional purge I'd written earlier, this would be a factual explanation of what I had done and why. I sat at the kitchen table one final time, pen in hand. "Dear Robert, by the time you read this, I will have moved from the farm. After our conversation on Mother's Day when you told me I was too old to matter, I was forced to reevaluate our relationship and my future. The farm has been sold to a young couple who will continue its agricultural tradition. The sale was completed on July 15th for $212,000. This was my legal right as the sole owner of the property. I have relocated to Millfield Gardens Senior Apartments, where I intend to live independently for as long as I am able. The proceeds from the farm's sale have been invested to supplement my income. I have left several items I thought you might want. Everything else has either come with me or been sold/donated. This decision was not made in haste or anger, but with careful consideration for my dignity and well-being. When you declared me irrelevant because of my age, you revealed how you truly see me not as your mother deserving of respect, but as a caretaker of your presumed inheritance. I hope someday you will understand that parents are not merely vessels for passing property to the next generation. We are individuals with our own rights to happiness and self-determination. If you wish to contact me, my new address and phone number are listed below. I ask that you respect my decision even if you disagree with it. Mom. I sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it on the kitchen table where he couldn't miss it. Beside it, I left the key to the farmhouse with a note explaining that the new owners would arrive on August 1st. For Emma and Michael, I left special packages in their former bedrooms. Photo albums I had created documenting their visits to the farm, along with the heirlooms I had chosen for each of them and notes explaining their significance. On my final morning, July 31st, I woke before dawn. I had slept on a camping mattress, my bed already moved to the new apartment. The farmhouse echoed with emptiness, most possessions now gone. I made a simple breakfast of toast and coffee, using paper plates and the camping mug James and I had taken on fishing trips. As the sun rose, I walked through each room one last time. In the master bedroom, I ran my fingers along the wall where pencil marks recorded Robert's height at various ages. In his childhood bedroom, I remembered countless nights reading him stories until he fell asleep. In the living room, I gazed at the fireplace where James and I had spent winter evenings planning our future. Finally, I stepped onto the porch and looked out at the farm one last time as its owner. The morning light gilded the fields, the barn, the ancient oak tree. Birds sang in the orchard. A gentle breeze carried the scent of summer grass and wildflowers. Goodbye, I whispered to the farm, to James's memory, to the life we had built together. Thank you. Marge arrived at 9 a.m. sharp to drive me to my new home. We loaded the last few boxes and my suitcase into her car. I placed my letter to Robert on the kitchen table, took one final look around, and locked the door behind me. As we drove down the long driveway, I didn't look back. My gaze was fixed firmly ahead, toward whatever came next. The first night in my new apartment was disorienting. City noises replaced the familiar sounds of the countryside. The walls seemed too close, the ceiling too low. I lay awake, questioning everything. Had I acted rashly? Should I have confronted Robert directly instead of this dramatic severance? Was I punishing my son for a single cruel comment? But as dawn brightened my new windows, I knew the Mother's Day incident had merely been the breaking point, not the entire problem. Robert's comment about my irrelevance had simply confirmed what his actions had suggested for years. In his eyes, I was merely the caretaker of his inheritance. That first week I established new routines. Morning coffee on my small balcony, walks through the community gardens, grocery shopping at the nearby market. Each day brought small discoveries and adjustments. My neighbors at Millfield Gardens welcomed me warmly. Many were farm folks like myself, who understood the bittersweet nature of leaving land that had defined you for decades. Maureen from apartment 207 invited me to the weekly card game. Frank from across the hall shared tomatoes from his daughter's garden. Linda from the community center helped me navigate the schedule of activities from chair yoga to book discussions. 10 days after my move, Robert called. I had been bracing for this moment, rehearsing calm responses to his inevitable anger. How could you? He demanded, his voice tight with fury. That farm was meant to be my inheritance. The farm was my home, Robert, I replied steadily. Not your inheritance. You had no right to sell it without even discussing it with me. I had every legal right. The property was solely in my name. This isn't about legality. It's about family. That land has been in our family for generations. Yes, and each generation made their own decisions about it. This was my decision to make. I can't believe you did this out of spite, just because I suggested you were getting too old to manage alone. You didn't suggest I was getting too old to manage alone, I corrected him. You stated that I was too old to matter anymore. Those were your exact words. The line went silent for a moment. I didn't mean it like that, he finally said, his tone defensive. How else could you have meant it, Robert? Another silence. Where are you living now? He asked, changing tactics. I explained about Millfield Gardens, about my financial arrangements, about the security and community I was finding there. So you threw away our family heritage for a senior apartment? His voice dripped with disdain. I exchanged property for peace of mind, I countered. The farm went to a young couple who will love it as we once did. Nothing was thrown away. What about my children? Their connection to their heritage? Emma and Michael are welcome to visit me anytime. Their heritage isn't just a piece of land, Robert. It's the values and memories we share. The conversation ended unresolved, with Robert declaring he needed time to process this betrayal. I hung up feeling drained but oddly unburdened. I had spoken my truth without anger or apology. 2 weeks later, Catherine called. Eleanor? It's Catherine. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Of course, Catherine. I wanted to say that I understand why you sold the farm, she said quietly. Robert doesn't know I'm calling. He's still very angry. I expected he would be. The thing is, she continued hesitantly, what he said to you on Mother's Day was horrible. I should have spoken up then, and I'm sorry I didn't. Her unexpected support brought tears to my eyes. Thank you for saying that, Catherine. The children miss you. Would it be okay if I brought them to visit sometime when Robert is traveling for work? I would love that, I said sincerely. True to her word, Catherine brought Emma and Michael to visit the following month while Robert attended a business conference. They admired my new apartment, especially the balcony garden I had started with herbs and flowers in colorful pots. It's smaller than the farm, but it's nice, Grandma, Emma said diplomatically. Dad says you moved because you're mad at him, Michael added with the directness of a 12-year-old. I moved because it was time for a change, I explained. Sometimes adults disagree about important decisions. Catherine gave me a grateful look for not putting the children in the middle. That visit became a monthly tradition. Catherine would bring the children when Robert traveled, and we would bake cookies in my compact kitchen or play board games at my new dining table. Sometimes we walked to the nearby park or visited the ice cream shop around the corner. Meanwhile, my life at Millfield Gardens expanded in unexpected ways. I joined the community garden committee, putting my farming knowledge to use in raised beds rather than acres. I attended a writing workshop at the local library and began recording family stories for Emma and Michael. Most surprisingly, I discovered a talent for watercolor painting, something I had dabbled in briefly before marriage, but abandoned due to farm responsibilities. My small paintings of familiar farm scenes decorated my apartment walls, each one a window back to the life I had known. 3 months after my move, I hosted my first dinner party. Marge, Diane, and Patricia joined Linda and Maureen from Millfield Gardens around my dining table. We shared a meal, stories, and laughter that echoed in my new space, making it feel truly like home for the first time. "You're different," Marge observed as she helped me wash dishes afterward. "Lighter somehow." "I feel lighter," I admitted. I didn't realize how much energy I was spending maintaining not just the farm, but the illusion that Robert still valued it as a family home rather than a financial asset. "You deserved better," she said firmly. "Maybe, but I've learned it's up to me to create better, not wait for someone else to provide it." 6 months after the sale, Robert finally reached out again. His email was stiff but not hostile, suggesting lunch to discuss family matters. I agreed, suggesting a cafe near my apartment. He arrived punctually, dressed in his business attire, looking oddly out of place among the casual lunch crowd. After awkward greetings, we ordered and sat in uncomfortable silence until our food arrived. "You're looking well," he finally offered, sounding surprised. "Thank you. I am well. The apartment is suitable? More than suitable. It's becoming home." He nodded, pushing his salad around with his fork. "I've had time to think about what happened. While I still believe you should have discussed such a major decision with me, I recognize that legally, it was your right to sell. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more concession than I had expected." "I appreciate that, Robert. Catherine and the kids speak highly of your place. They seem to enjoy visiting." "I enjoy having them. You would be welcome too, you know." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. "Would I? After what I said on Mother's Day?" "That depends," I said honestly. "Do you still believe I'm too old to matter?" Color rose in his cheeks. I never should have said that. It was cruel and untrue. I was frustrated about the farm situation, but that's no excuse. "No, it isn't," I agreed. "But recognizing that is a start." We talked for nearly 2 hours, more openly than we had in years. Robert admitted that he had taken me for granted, assuming the farm would eventually be his without considering what I might want or need. I acknowledged that I had enabled his entitlement by never setting clear boundaries. "I'd like to try to rebuild our relationship," he said as we prepared to leave. "On new terms. Not about the farm or inheritance or any of that. Just as mother and son." "I'd like that too," I said. "But it will take time and effort from both of us." "I understand. I'm willing to try if you are." As we parted, he hugged me, an awkward but genuine embrace that felt like the first step on a long road of reconciliation. 1 year after selling the farm, I celebrated my 68th birthday in my apartment with friends old and new, plus Catherine, Emma, and Michael. Robert attended briefly, still somewhat uncomfortable in this environment but making an effort. He brought a thoughtful gift, a digital frame loaded with family photographs from the farm, including many of James the First had never seen. Later that evening, after everyone had gone, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset over the town. My life had contracted in some ways: physical space, rural isolation, and expanded in others: social connections, creative pursuits, personal freedom. Had I lost something precious in leaving the farm? Certainly. That land had held my history, my marriage, my most treasured memories. But I had gained something equally valuable: the knowledge that I mattered enough to stand up for myself, to claim my right to determine my own path regardless of age or expectations. The farm had taught me about resilience through harsh winters and failed crops. Now, in this unexpected final chapter, I was living that resilience in a new way, uprooting myself to find fresh soil where I could still grow and thrive. The deep lesson I learned through all of this was simple yet profound. No one can define your worth but you. Age doesn't diminish your right to respect, to autonomy, to matter. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and ultimately for others is to refuse to be diminished, to insist on your own significance. Robert and I continue our careful rebuilding. Some days are easier than others. The farm sale remains a sensitive topic, but we're learning to focus on the present and future rather than the past. I've visited the Thompsons twice now. Seeing their children playing in the same orchard where Robert once played brings a bittersweet joy. I don't know how many years I have left, but I know this. However many they are, they will be lived on my terms, with the dignity and self-respect everyone deserves at every age. Because we all matter, from our first breath to our last. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect your self-worth? Or found yourself starting over when you least expected it? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and renewal. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that they matter no matter their age, share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, it's never too late to stand up for yourself and create the life you deserve.